In this Maximo Application Suite video, brought to you by Maven Asset Management, I want to finish part 2 of this API Roundup topic that we started earlier, focusing our discussion on working demonstrations of each of the APIs for the Application Suite, including the Manage REST API, Manage Tools API, and Mass Admin API. And really want to make sure that we cover for each of these APIs some key components, including the endpoint URLs, the operations, get, post, or put, the headers, which are most often used for authentication, any parameters that can be passed in as some examples, the body, which would be JSON for these APIs, and then the response, so that way we can understand what was provided by the API. For the demonstration, which we're going to be using a Postman project that I put together, I will review the Manage REST API, which we're going to go ahead and do some creation and updating and querying of assets. And then we'll review the more recently added log streaming functionality, which is a great addition for the OpenShift architecture. The Manage Tools API for running Integrity Checker, and we're going to go ahead and look to see the logs that are available from the tools functions for Manage. And then for the Mass Admin API, the examples we're going to walk through are obtaining some general environment information, updating and querying for a Mass core user, and then working with a simple configuration in Mass, including querying and updating the idle timeout property. This video will cover a few examples, so I'll provide the links to the IBM documentation for each of these APIs for anyone interested in diving deeper. Let's get started. Let's start by covering the Manage REST API regarding asset operations. I already have my authentication set up to use the API key header. I'm passing in my value from a property. Under my assets folder, I have a number of operations. To start, let's review the query operation. As you can see looking at the URL, it hits the manage host with the full suite domain endpoint, Maximo API, in this case, object structure, MX asset. Here I'm passing in via parameters the OSLC where clause, the OSLC select fields that I want to return in the result, maximum number of records per page, and then the lean is used to hide a number of additional tags that really aren't required if you're looking for a basic simple JSON API. So authorization is the API key header. And if you look at these 7 hidden headers here, you can see this is what the full request looks like. In this case, the body is empty, and the response provides a member collection of asset numbers or asset information. You can see here we have the asset num, site ID, location, which were the fields that we had requested in our headers, in our parameter. If we wanted to add to this, we could, for example, provide status and status date. And then when we run that, we now have status and status date. So extremely flexible, don't need to pull information you don't need, but all is there. So that is for querying by a where clause. You also can query by a single asset. So in this case, site ID equals fleet and asset num equals T1000. And when I run that, we get back just the single asset. And you'll notice inside of this response, we did receive a href URL that has a specific link. You can use this exact link as a get call. So these have been both gets as a get call to get back the exact asset that you're interested in. So if I run this, I get back an exact asset, one specific asset, no member grouping. So it's just the information for this one asset. As far as creation, instead of a get, we're going to go ahead and do a post, and we're going to send to the exact same endpoint, but now the only parameters that I'm going to pass in are the lean parameter, so that my response does not include too much information. Authorization is the exact same. It still uses the API key header, and the body now includes some information that we want to include in our creation. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and just send this as is. And you look here at the bottom, we've received a response back, which includes our asset number, our site ID, the href, so this property here. And from here, we can now go over to manage and find our asset. So let's go ahead and do that. Search by asset number. And here we are, sample asset from Manage REST API. So in this case, I did want to do an update. So let's pretend we had an example we just wanted to append to our description. So we're going to come back. In this case, this is the unique component to find this asset. I'm going to go ahead and update that inside of our variables because I've got a variable for it. I need to update the initial value and the current value. Save and save. And now, here we are on another post. This is also a post. The parameters are lean. Notice the headers, though, we have an X method override that was added, set to a value of patch. This is required because we're doing an update. And so you'll see here the URL is the same, Maximo API OS MX asset, and now we're passing in the ID that we received in that href value. So if we send a updated description and hit send, we get back a 204 status response. If we come back to manage and we refresh, we have our updated URL. Now we're back in Mange, we have our updated description. Let's take a quick look at the log streaming. I have a logs endpoint streaming. If we look, we'll see the parameters. I have a parameter of an action with this WS method stream log. Authorization is the same authorization we had before, which is the API key header. And we have no additional headers. The body is empty. And then whenever you hit the Maximo API service logging with a GET, you are returned the system out log available on this node. This is hugely popular and important because now we have a way to get access to our environment logs. So let's jump into the Manage Tools API next. I wanted to start by just doing a quick review of the authorization or authentication. We have the API key that we obtain with inside of Manage, and it's being passed in as a header with a key of API key. If we take a look, we have a couple options. We have the ability to run the integrity checker report. This is available using the host maxinst with the suite domain that we had used for the Manage API, and it hits the Tools API, Tools Service, in this case iChecker report. It's a post command. There's no parameters. There's just the header that passes our authentication, and there is no body. So if we hit send here, we will receive a list of the list file and the log file related to this log. So at this moment, the integrity checker is running on this environment. So what we're going to do next is let's go ahead and take a look at the get tools log list. It is the same endpoint except tools service and tools log. No headers, no parameters other than the authentication, and there's no body. And when we hit send on this, and what you'll receive is a list of files that are available to be obtained, or log files to be obtained through this service. So in this case, you can see the integrity checker list file and log file are here, and the timestamp is as of right now. So if we want to, we have the ability to go ahead and grab our log file information. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this log file name and take a look at the get specific log endpoint. So where this was tools log, tool service tools log, the get specific log is the same, but we're going to be able to pass in a parameter of log file. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and pass in a log file name. I'm going to go ahead and save my parameter. Same authentication, no extra headers, still an empty body. But when I hit send, I am returned back a list of the integrity checker log, and you can see it running here and here and here. There's some additional uses for this tools API, including stopping and starting Mange, but I wanted to highlight the fact that you had the ability to run integrity checker. You had the option to look at the tools logs available by using the get tools list, looking through the list, and then taking the name, passing that name into the endpoint. Lastly, I wanted to cover the mass admin API. So here we are back inside of Postman. I just wanted to quickly cover the authentication again, making sure that everybody remembers that we have to get the JSON web token, and that's by providing basic authentication with the API key and API password that were provided inside of the mass core application. By running that against the v1 authenticate endpoint with a get against the API host, you should be returned with a token. This token is what you end up passing into all of the other mass admin API calls. So I'll take that Java web token. In this case, it's the X-access token provided, not the API key that we use for the manage endpoints. And so in this case, we'll start with a general environment information capture. So in this case, no parameters, the X-access token, the body is empty, and when we hit the about endpoint, it provides general information about the environment. This is confirmation that the environment is working. Next, let's do a review of querying the endpoint and updating a title. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and use the Abby user. So let's go take a look inside of the application suite at our Abby user. We see that we have Abby Rhodes, and in this case, we see that she has a title of standard user for Abby Rhodes. So we have a get against the API v3 users passing in the user ID for Abby. No additional parameters, no additional headers required. We hit our get, and it provides information about Abby from mass core. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and do a title update. So currently the title is set to standard user. So I have a put endpoint available, v3 users Abby, put, authorization is the same API key, no additional headers are required. But on the body, I'm going to go ahead and pass in a title. In this case, I'm going to set her to a mastermind. I found that the display name and the entitlement sections were required, so I'm going to go ahead and continue to provide those in. But if we do a put with this JSON body and we hit send, we receive a response back of our information, same information that we received on the query. And then if we come over to manage, if I go to users, Abby, if we look under user details, we'll see that her title is now set to mastermind. And you can see here that it was even updated by the user that I created the API. This update was tied to my API key update. With inside of manage. Lastly, let's go ahead and take a look at a configuration change. So inside of mass, we have a view. Let's go ahead and take a look at the idle timeout option. This is a configuration available inside of mass core, and we can go ahead and do an endpoint. We can go ahead and do a get call against the config idle timeout, and we can see that the value is currently set to 1700. Using the exact same endpoint config idle timeout, we have the ability to change this to another value. I'll go ahead and put it to 1800, hit send, and the API returns a value confirmation of the change. Thank you so much for joining us for part 2 of this API Roundup video for the Maximo application suite, as I demonstrated using each of these APIs available for the suite and manage. I hope you found it helpful in understanding these powerful features.